So I'm going to go to my next guest. We are joined with Brian Mier. Brian, how you doing today, man? You doing okay?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me on.
No, oh man, I appreciate you joining me. Brian is a journalist and geographer who has lived in Brazil for 26 years. He is co-editor at independent news website Brazil Wire and Brazil correspondent for Telesur English news program, quote, from the South, unquote. And thank you for sending me the videos associated with it. I went through all of them, and I went through the article that Lula made. I also went through a few other articles to kind of nail down what was taking place, because some of my audience disagrees, and I think they're insane for disagreeing on this case. Bolsonaro convicted, 27 years in prison. I think it was 27 years, 3 months to be accurate. And he's convicted for effectively trying to overthrow the democratic government of Brazil. And just to read, it says right here, in 2022 election in the coup plot that included disbanding courts, empowering military, and assassinating the president, who was at that point Lula da Silva. I was there for that election, by the way, and I had the opportunity to talk to people on the ground. That was an astonishing election. For one, it was done very efficiently, so it was done very early, like 9 o'clock at night. Lula only won by like 51% to 48%. It was very close, much closer than I would have expected. And when I talked to the people on the ground, there were actually some people that believed that Brazil needed and required a military dictatorship. Now, when you press those people a little bit more, they may waver on that. But some of the people actually believe that. There were protests hanging out at military bases, wanting the military to effectively overthrow the government because Lula won. I'm amazed by that. Give me your take on this, though. First, on Bolsonaro's and his conviction, and two, on the response of the public in this regard.
Okay, well, first of all, Bolsonaro has been proven now in court to have an entire, network of very well-funded operatives spreading disinformation on social media about the electoral process. It was a key strategy of their group, as proven in these 3 investigations that took place. That their strategy was to spread a false narrative that the electronic voting system was susceptible to hacking. And they spent about 2 years doing this, with constant communication, by the way, with people like Steve Bannon in the United States, effectively preemptively building a stop the steal narrative. And he was first punished and disqualified for running for office for 8 years after he abused his power as president by harnessing the National Public Television Network to produce a 1-hour live broadcast with over 100 foreign diplomats only a few weeks from the election, in which he lied without providing any evidence whatsoever that the elections were going to be hacked and that the system was susceptible to fraud. Then he ordered the military to do an internal investigation on the susceptibility to fraud of the electronic voting system. And their own investigation, his own military, who he appointed, came up with a result that it was impossible to hack into the system. So then he repressed that study from being released to the public. So we know that a lot of people are victims to this kind of disinformation on social media. It's a huge problem. We see it in London right now, and in the UK with this the largest fascist march in the history of the UK took place on Saturday. So that's one of the reasons that some people in the public, or a large minority, believed that Brazil should revert to a military dictatorship. But regarding the conviction, it started with a parliamentary investigation that produced a 3,000-page final report suggesting that the federal police investigate. The federal police investigated and came up with a 1,000-page final report based on mountains of material evidence, indicting Bolsonaro and 33 of his cronies. Based on that report, the Attorney General's office launched a 3rd investigation, and its final result was a 272-page report indicting Bolsonaro and 31 of his cronies. One person
Wow.
made it out through that report, and that's how the trial started, really, you know. And it was an investigation that was initially called for by the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court in Brazil doesn't have a Supreme Court police. The U.S. Supreme Court has its own police force. It has its own intelligence department, and its primary goal is to investigate threats against Supreme Court justices, right? And this is what was happening in Brazil: death threats, doxing, and things like that happening on social media. So that's how the investigation into Bolsonaro initially began. Everything that happened is totally within the framework of Brazilian law. Brazil's laws are different than the U.S. laws. Some bad faith actors, including Glenn Greenwald, who's been pushing the same narrative that the Bolsonaros have been pushing about an authoritarian judiciary now for like
Yes.
2 years. They try to say, oh, well, it wasn't the full. Well, that's the law. In the year, I don't know if I just dropped or you just dropped. Can you hear me?
No, I'm still here. I can still hear you.
Okay,
I can see you.
all right,
Yeah.
all right, great. Well, until 2020, all cases in the Supreme Court dealing with criminal charges were reviewed by panels. There's 2 panels with 5 justices each. This was because of the backlog. And so in 2020, they switched it to go up to the full 11-member body of the court. But it created it exacerbated the backlog by so much that in 2023, the Supreme Court unanimously voted to revert to this panel system, including the 2 appointees by Jair Bolsonaro voted in favor of referring all criminal cases to the panels, and the investigation into Bolsonaro was underway at that point. So some of the arguments people have been trying to use to delegitimize this process are just based on United States law, but Brazil has different laws, you know?
Yeah.
And you have to respect it.
Well, I'm just gonna say, I think that's where Glenn Greenwald comes from it. Like he's looking at, but I think he's looking at this. I think he's looking at this wrong, frankly. Like honestly, Donald Trump should have been convicted. No, please.
Yeah, I agree. But even comparing the Donald Trump case with the Bolsonaro case is a false equivalency. There's a lot of similarities, but Donald Trump didn't spend 2 years coordinating with military leadership a military coup. I mean, the point of this insurrection or Capitol riots or whatever you want to call it in Brazil was there was a strategy behind it that was uncovered by the federal police, which is that they were trying to force Lula's hand to declare a state of emergency. And so there were high-level police officers, police commanders cooperating with the rioters, opening the doors to the government buildings for them in the hopes that Lula would declare a state of emergency. If that happened, security of Brazil would have been temporarily turned over to the armed forces. And it was written in a plan that was found, on Bolsonaro's desk, printed on his computer in the presidential palace, that at that moment, the military would then arrest Lula, arrest the Supreme Court ministers, arrest Vice President Geraldo Alckmin, and then announce that they were going to take over governing the country until new elections could be held. Well, that's what they announced in 1964, that they were taking over the country until new elections could be held. And the new elections were only held in 1989. So it was clearly an attempt at a coup. There was a special forces unit that was surveilling Lula, Geraldo Alckmin, and Supreme Court Minister Alexandre de Moraes. And this was called Operation Green and Yellow Fist. Green and yellow are the colors of the flag. And they were planning to assassinate the 3 of them. That's been uncovered as well, and it's been proven that Bolsonaro knew about this. So that's very different from what happened with Trump. Okay, Trump should probably have been arrested or put on trial for inciting a riot at the Capitol. But no one's come out with this proof that Trump had been plotting that for 2 years with, former actors from the military dictatorship, like General Augusto Heleno, he was an important figure in the dictatorship that ended in 1985, and also the commander of Minustah's armed forces during the Sitsolé massacre. I mean, no, he was in charge of 16 departments in the federal government, including intelligence, and he was one of the people behind this 2 years of coup plotting. So it's a much more serious case in Brazil, and I feel like I see some of the Democratic aligned press, like New York Times and things like that, trying to both sides it and say, oh, look, this is what happened in Brazil. It's just the same thing that Trump did. Well, no, it was a lot worse. I mean, the day of those riots, right, they blew up 17 high tension electrical towers across the country, creating blackouts in a bunch of different towns to create this kind of feeling of chaos. They also apprehended one of the people who was living in one of these camps in front of the military bases, demanding military intervention, trying to transport a bomb to the Brasilia airport on Christmas Day, a bomb attached to a petroleum truck, and so there was also an attempt to storm the federal police headquarters. It was attacked with Molotov cocktails, and they were burning buses and cars a couple weeks before the January 8th insurrection, and also the day that Lula and his wife came to Brasilia for a ceremony in which you receive your official qualifications a couple weeks before taking power. Rioters attacked the hotel he was in with Molotov cocktails, and so it was more violent than. As bad as the Trump thing was, I feel like the Trump thing was just he'd worked his followers up into such a frenzy. He would just basically yell "Go!" and they all ran towards the Capitol or something, right? Like I don't feel. I mean, they did have planning meetings and stuff. I'm not an expert in what happened in the U.S. I know they had that War Council meeting because Eduardo Bolsonaro, Jair's son, partook in that with Giuliani and all the other people in that meeting. But I don't think it was as well planned as what happened in Brazil, because Brazil has a history of military coups. The first military coup took place in 1891. There have been 13 military coup or military coup attempts between 1891 and 2023. And this is the first time in history that any high-ranking member of the Brazilian military has ever been convicted of participating in a coup. And these are big people. It's his former defense minister, General Heleno, who dates back to General Heleno took part in an auto coup attempt during the dictatorship because he was the personal attaché for a general named Silvio Frota, who was like from the hardline fascist group of military leadership that didn't want to return to civilian rule. So he tried to overthrow the government from inside in 1978. He was only transferred to a desk job and forced into early retirement. Heleno was his personal assistant during that coup attempt, And after the dictatorship ended, they gave amnesty to all of the torturers and all of the people who'd been killing labor union leaders and students and activists and stuff like that. So this is it was a historical moment in Brazil last week when we saw 5 high-ranking members of the armed forces convicted for participating in an attempt to overthrow the government and install a military dictatorship. It's almost bigger news than Bolsonaro's conviction if you look at Brazilian history.
It's wild. No, you're right. This is very different than the Trump thing. I mean, there were separatist groups that were talking about attacking the Capitol, like hanging out in Virginia with the idea of raiding almost like a special forces or paramilitary if Trump gave the word for it, but there was no evidence that Donald Trump was connected to these groups. A lot of what Trump was doing was internal. He was working through the political machine to try to effectively overthrow the government itself. And of course, some electors got pinched, but it was different. This was far like what you're describing is effectively murder and taking the government in this kind of putsch attempt. And who knows if another election would have been held after that. No, this is radical.
Of course not. I mean, if you look at the history of Brazil's coups, of course there wouldn't have been an election.
Mm-hmm.
They might have allowed Senate during the dictatorship. They allowed 2 political parties to exist, I think it reminds me of the United States today with its two parties, because they symbolically allow other parties to exist, but they don't enable them to win elections or anything. But
Correct.
there were two parties that were allowed to exist. The dictatorship appointed governors, but they had elections for mayor, for senator. The Senate was like 2 elected senators, 1 appointed by the dictatorship. They had congressional elections the entire time during the dictatorship. They just said you could only belong to these 2 right-wing parties. And so I think if the military had taken control, they would have created some kind of scenario in which some elections would have been taking place, but not presidential. At least not for a few years.
Brian, that is a fantastic breakdown. Thank you for that. Before I let you go, there's one more thing I want to hit. If you can hit it, if you can't, that's perfectly fine. Donald Trump has murdered 3 more people in the South Caribbean, claiming that they were quote unquote narco terrorists. What is the region thinking about this? I mean, the United States seems to be setting up a decapitation strike on Venezuela, and they have all sorts of forces in the region. I can't believe that the region is okay with the U.S. coming back with this kind of Monroe Doctrine, part deux, with the military force that they've arranged against Venezuela that is in the Caribbean. If you don't want to touch it, that's fine. But I am curious.
No, that's fine. I mean, obviously, the countries that are completely sycophantic to Trump and the Trump administration and the U.S. government in general, like Javier Milei's Argentina, Ecuador, these countries are applauding it. And any country that has any level of sovereignty, the people are very upset about it. President Lula has criticized it, even though they've got the relationships between Brazil and Venezuela at a low point right now. But hopefully the fact that both countries are under attack, Brazil's clearly under some kind of hybrid warfare attack from the US right now, and Venezuela is like physically under attack. This is going to bring them closer together. And I hope they can sort out their differences and unite the way they united in 2004 to defeat George Bush's free trade agreement of the Americas when Hugo Chavez and Lula pushed through that measure, infuriating the Bush administration. So I hope that this pushes Venezuela and Brazil closer together, because these 2 countries need each other right now.
So Brazil does accept that it's under an attack. I mean,
of course, yeah. Like, top level members of the party have said it. Lula said it. All the analysts are saying that Brazil is under hybrid warfare attack from the Trump administration right now.
What is the response? I know they call for the BRICS meeting, but is there any kind of individual response that?
Regarding the tariffs, they pushed through like a $8 billion economic stimulus package for all of the industries that were affected by the tariffs. And China has stepped in and bought up all the coffee that wasn't going to the U.S. And so ironically, Brazil's foreign trade increased to $6.1 billion during the first month of the sanctions, and new employment figures have just been released, and now it's got its lowest unemployment rate since 2012. So economically, Brazil has done a very good job of protecting itself. The big problem are these social media oligarchs targeting the Brazilian left right now, targeting the Workers' Party government. Well, Elon Musk has repeatedly threatened Brazil, and we know the relationship between the oligarchs like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk and the guy from, I don't know, it's Discord or Rumble, I'm confused, with the Trump administration. And so what you see is algorithmic manipulation to constantly bury opinions from leftists on the big social media platforms. There's Zuckerberg too. Sorry, I didn't mention this. Zuckerberg. They're all gunning for Brazil because they don't want to be held liable for Brazilian crimes committed on their platforms. And so Brazil is trying to regulate specifically against pedophiles and people targeting children and adolescents on social media. The the social media companies don't want to be held liable for this. They want to be able to apply U.S. regulatory environment in Brazil. Brazil has different laws related to speech. You can't promote Nazism in Brazil. That's a violation. There's no freedom for Nazis. There's no freedom for pedophiles. An organization like NAMBLA would be illegal in Brazil, where it's totally legal in the US. Brazil's conception of free speech is that everyone has the right to it. It's a fundamental right, but it can't be used to deny other people's rights. So you can't cry free speech to call for like
military
apartheid, installation of an apartheid system, or like massacring ethnic minorities or killing trans people or something like that. That's not free speech in Brazil. Just as you can't cry free speech for systematically trying to discredit the election system, because the right to a free and fair vote is also a fundamental human right in Brazil, right? So the laws are different. The social media companies are furious because they want to be able to obey U.S. laws all over the world. They don't accept the fact that another country can have its own laws. This is why you get their shills like Greenwald crying about First Amendment rights in Brazil. Brazil doesn't have the First Amendment. Brazil's conception of free speech is like France or Germany's. It's not the same. Different countries have a right to have different laws.
No, that's a good point. I mean, this is the Nepal thing, right? Where Nepal says, well, we need to regulate. You can't do any and everything that you want to do in Nepal, and we have rules that are different than what you guys have in the US.
You see what Silicon Valley is doing there. That coup is from Silicon Valley. I mean, that's the type of thing they want to do everywhere. But Brazil's, luckily Brazil's part of the BRICS, and it's getting big backup from the BRICS, especially China right now. And it's not going to be as easy to do in Brazil what they did in Nepal.
Do you think part of the rationale for going after Venezuela has to do with the influence of China and Russia in South America? I mean, China has built a massive port in Peru, for example. Obviously, the countries of South America have been leaning further into the China direction because of the way that the U.S. has effectively ran, let's say, roughshod over South America for God knows how long under this model that we're supposed to be able to control South America. Do you think it has more to do with that, the oil resources, the mineral resources, like all of these things, with the drug, quote unquote, issue being a stalking horse for just blatant naked hegemony? Yeah,
but I like the way you put that. Sorry, I interrupted a little bit there.
You're fine.
Okay. The big issue is China, right? Like China is just like, for example, when Lula was first elected in 2003, the U.S. was Brazil's biggest trading partner by far. By the time Bolsonaro left office, China was doing 3 times more trade with Brazil than the U.S. 3 times. Trade with China increased significantly under Bolsonaro, despite all of the Trumpian Tucker Carlson type people saying, Lula's subordinate to China. Bolsonaro, is friends with the United States. That's not how the last offshore oil reserve auction that Bolsonaro held, it was entirely, all of the people who won the bids were Chinese companies. All of the companies, not people, sorry. It was all Chinese. Bolsonaro did massive trade with the Chinese. And the thing that they like about China and Latin America, in addition to the fact that China's never couped anybody, China's never invaded anyone in Latin America. I mean, the U.S. has invaded Mexico so many times that at one point, both sides during the Mexican Civil War officially asked the U.S. troops to leave. The U.S. invades everybody, it coups everybody. China's never done any of that. But on top of that, when China gives out loans, it doesn't put austerity conditionalities on them. Neoliberal austerity conditionalities. Like the U.S. Propped up Bretton Woods system like World Bank and IMF, which are dominated by the U.S. When they give a loan to a country in Latin America, they say, okay, we'll give you this loan, but you have to start charging children for public school tuition. You have to introduce a voucher system for your public schools. Otherwise, we won't give you the loan. China never does that. China's like, You want to do business with us? Here's the loan. We don't give a damn what you do inside your own country. It's your country. You have sovereignty. The U.S. doesn't operate. The U.S. tries to blackmail. It really trashed the U.S. and its institutions, World Bank, IMF, which are dominated. If you look at the shareholdings in those banks, the majority shareholder is the U.S., the largest shareholder. Majority, I think, in World Bank and largest shareholder in IMF. But anyway, you look at what they did to Africa in the 1980s. It's ridiculous. The way they just dismantled the entire social safety net system, the public institutions, in exchange for these loans, that didn't do any good. I remember after the IMF took over surveillance of Mozambique's economy after the Renamo Frelimo War, within 5 years, the IMF had transformed Mozambique into the poorest country in the world. I'm going off on a tangent here. But that's why Latin American countries like doing business with China, because it's not, unfortunately, it's not this ideological push towards communism in Latin America. It's just intelligent people wanting to do fair business,
Yeah.
As opposed to this blackmail from the U.S. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was speaking to my last guest from Africa, and he was pointing out the way that the IMF effectively, there's so many strings attached, and oftentimes it's damaging to the country. It's not to the benefit of the country at all. It's just so.
Yeah, and you get these ridiculous, like, U.S. Trotskyists accusing China of being imperialist in Africa. When they hold off their criticism, I'm not saying all Trotskyists or whatever, but hold off all their criticism of the IMF and just say, oh, there's danger signs of imperialism from China and Africa. It's like, is China ordering these people to start charging tuition for public kindergarten? Because that's what the U.S. institutions do.
Brian, you are awesome. And that breakdown that is what I was looking for. The explanation of A, the difference between the US and Brazil, B, why Bolsonaro was being convicted. It wasn't a thought crime. He was actually taking action to murder his political opposition and install the dictatorship. This wasn't just, he was thinking about this. He was actually doing this. There's a difference in those things. Thank you for this, man. I really appreciate it. Brian Mier. Brian Mier, he's a journalist, geographer, who has lived in Brazil for more than 26 years. He's co-editor of the independent news website Brazil Wire. Brazil Wire is a damn good magazine, by the way. Just pointing it out.
Sort of in semi-retirement right now. You could check out my blog, Delinking Brazil, on Substack too. Brazil Wire is a little bit on hiatus.
I used to love Brazil Wire. Okay.
It was all voluntary. We put so much work into it during the coup period and Lula's imprisonment. It's like we were just exhausted when he got back to power again. We never got a dime for that. So we just put it on hiatus.
That's where I learned most of the coup stuff from Brazil Wire. Where you guys had investigative reporting, you were doing deep dives into it. It was like... Yeah,
I wrote more than 40 articles about U.S. influence on the coup and Lula's imprisonment before the Intercept released those leaks.
Yeah,
so
you guys did fantastic work. I'm sorry to stop there, but you guys did fantastic work. Brazil
Sorry,
Wire,
I'm talking too much. I know I've overextended my time slot here.
No, you haven't actually. You were perfectly fine. Your time slot was 30 minutes. Have we?
All right.
Yeah. Okay, you were plenty of time. You were fantastic. You're great. No, you're perfectly fine. You haven't overtalked anything. Right. You are now with Telesur English. Is that correct?
Telesur English, and I have my Substack blog, Delinking Brazil.
Okay. I want to.
And I've been in Brazil now 30 years, so that bio information is 4 years old.
All right, I'm gonna update.
It's my fault. It's my fault. That's what I say on Twitter still. So on X.
No, that's perfectly fine. Thank you for this, man. Honestly, this was a fantastic breakdown. And I haven't heard anybody kind of give details in this way. Even with the New York Times, they didn't necessarily go deep into.
I've written 7 articles for fairness and accuracy in reporting, about how crappy the New York Times coverage on this case has been. So you can name search me on FAIR if you want. Their coverage has been, I believe, influenced by the fact that its main writer covering it used to do the Silicon Valley beat for Wall Street Journal and is someone who seems to be going out of his way to give too much space to people like Elon Musk criticizing the Brazilian Supreme Court.
Yeah. I mean, New York Times has even written an article saying that they are looking to pardon Bolsonaro. And I'm like,
well,
okay, I don't
okay. The interesting thing about that is that this has been going on all year. And the latest news on this, it's a push for amnesty from Bolsonaro's own party, the Liberal Party, push for amnesty. The latest news is that push is fading right now because the far right are all backstabbing each other, jockeying to become the next candidate for president next year. There's like 3 or 4 people fighting with each other. They want Bolsonaro out of the picture. It's better for them. And so he's really, the danger of this amnesty pushing through was like 2 months ago, a month ago. Mm-hmm. Right now, the drive seems to be fading. And the Supreme Court has already announced that they won't accept it because it violates the Constitution to grant amnesty for people convicted of attempting a coup. So it's not, even if they were to push it through and override Lula's veto, it wouldn't clear the courts anyway. So it's just weird timing that the New York Times would bring this up right now.
Yeah.
Like why? Just like the 5 days before the 2022 election, they ran their first article accusing the Supreme Court of being authoritarian.
They were doing their jobs. The court did their jobs, right?
It just shows the convergence between Democrats and Republicans on Latin American issues. I mean, there isn't that much difference between Trump and the Democrats, really.
Yeah.
Just that Trump seems to be more like open in his attacks. If it was a Democrat, they'd be secretly doing all of this stuff under the table to try and wage
Trump's
a
more
hybrid
honest.
war against Brazil.
Yeah, he's far more honest. Hegemon. Like he just takes the mask off. It's almost like his assumption is that by virtue of the US's position, they should be able to dictate terms. And that's not the way this is functioning.
No.
Brian,
especially because he has an overinflated sense of the US's importance in the region. It's not the main player down here anymore. It's China. That's why the sanctions haven't really damaged Brazil.
Yeah. And I suspect a lot of this has to do with that. Meaning China is the issue more than anything else. Brian, thank you for this, man. You have a fantastic day. You enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Have a good one. Be safe. Brian, Mier, fantastic.